Welcome everybody. We're delighted that you could all join us for this Q&A. And I am really excited today to have with us Jamie Campbell. Jamie is the creative director and co-founder of 11 Film, and he is the executive producer of the hit Netflix show Sex Education. 11 Film produces quality drama, documentary and comedy for the UK and international markets, and Jamie's other hits have included Glue for E4 and the series Cast-Offs for Channel 4. And we are absolutely delighted to have him with us here at Young Film Academy. Welcome, Jamie.
Hello. How are you, James? Hello, everyone.
Everyone can hear you. We're really well, Jamie. We're really well. And thank you so much for joining us. I've got one question to kick you off, which is, as everyone else is binge watching Sex Education during this time, what are you binge watching?
Well, I've got quite into Tiger King, and last night actually I watched the Louis Theroux documentary about the Tiger King from about 10 years ago. So if you've seen Tiger King, I'd recommend going back in time by watching that Louis documentary. It's Louis Theroux often gets subjects sort of early on before anyone else has found them, and so you get a sort of different side of Joe Exotic if you watch his piece. So yeah, I love that.
Tiger King, fantastic. Yeah, we've been watching that too. So Jamie, thank you so much for being here. We want to just sort of, I suppose, before we get to talking about Sex Education, and I know that many people who are listening and out there and participating in this session will have questions for you about that show, which is an incredible hit. So congratulations to you and 11 on that. But I want to kind of backtrack a bit, because at Young Film Academy, we have a real focus on how to break into the industry. You know, we provide education and events and training for a younger age group than was ever considered sort of viable in this industry. So we work with predominantly under 19s. So if you kind of look back, I suppose, to start off, and we'll work our way up, when do you think that kind of passion for storytelling, stuff like that, kind of first showed itself? Was it something you did at school, or, you know, how do you say it first emerged?
I did a lot of writing at school and was really interested in putting plays on, and so did a bit of that. And the sort of change for me came when there was a bit of technology at school that became available to us. So we could borrow a camera that enabled us to sort of go out and shoot ideas, and then there was some kind of rudimentary editing equipment, and that felt like it was a massive sort of leg up to try out stuff. So I did quite a bit of that at school, and then when I was at university, was writing and directing quite a bit, but all really for the stage. And when I came out of university, I decided that I wanted to go to film school, and because I think I had a lot of enthusiasm for coming up with ideas and trying to realise them. But I wasn't sure that I necessarily knew everything technical about the process of filmmaking. I thought that would be useful to me. And because I think it is true in general that the film and TV industry is quite a kind of intimidating place, because knowledge in a way is quite powerful in this industry. And so I felt like getting a bit of experience by learning stuff about the technical side of directing and photography and editing would be a good thing. But ironically, I didn't get very far at the film school, because I had an idea when I was there, which I then filmed with an old friend of mine who then set up 11 with me. And so I ended up leaving the film school in order to complete that. And that was just an idea that we really believed in, and we managed to borrow. This was in the year 2000, when it was the sort of first time when you could walk into, you know, Curry's or Dixon's, and for about 100 quid you could buy a camera that was broadcast quality, and that was the first time that you could borrow it, and that was the first time that was really available to just, the general public if you could save a bit of cash and do it. So we managed to get our hands on this quite small sort of handy cam, and we borrowed a radio mic and we went off and filmed this idea, and then we pitched it to various broadcasters. There were a couple of people that we knew who knew people that were working for Channel 4, and so we sent this idea in, and we just were very, very lucky that Channel 4 looked at it and liked it and said, if you go off and film a bit more footage, then we'll broadcast it as a documentary. So that was a big break, really, about 20 years ago.
And so you literally wrote into Channel 4, I mean, blind. Like, how did that work? Because there'd be a lot of people who go, I just don't have the connections. I don't know how you would, even if you had an idea. How do you start that process?
Well, at the time, there are different ways to answer that question, but at the time, at Channel 4, there was a sort of, there was a strand of programs that they broadcast that was particularly for new filmmakers. And that those sorts of strands do still exist, both at the BBC and Channel 4, and I think Sky does those sorts of things as well. But we happened to know someone who, as I say, who knew someone who was a commissioner at Channel 4. So we both applied to that scheme and also sent in this tape because we thought we were making a sort of comedy feature film, and we'd cut this idea to 90 minutes. And then we did get some feedback from Channel 4, from the person that it had been sent to, who said, well, this definitely isn't either a feature film or a comedy, but it could be, maybe it could be a documentary. And so why don't you try sending it into the documentary department? And we did do that. And then it ended up being a half-hour documentary. And it was just because both me and Joel, who I'd made it with, were on screen, and we'd directed it together, and we were in it, and we shot it together and edited it and produced it. It was quite a kind of handmade approach, if you like. But it was in some ways the most satisfying thing I ever made, because we had no one telling us what to do, and we just went off and made something that we thought would be good, and then ultimately someone bought it. So that it was really exciting.
Well, I mean, that's a really inspiring story, because actually you're saying you went out and bought basically a sort of a handy cam. You got a radio mic, which is always part of the young filmmakers often find, sound recording is difficult. So, as you all know. So you bought that, and then you more or less went out with your friend and shot something that started you as the first sort of rung on the ladder. It was literally, without having done that, built from that.
Yeah, I would say though that there were lots of other ideas that didn't create the same feeling in me, that I didn't go out and film. And so I only went out and went on that process of borrowing that camera and getting the radio mic, and then going on quite a sort of elaborate trip to shoot it, because I had a very, very strong conviction in the idea. And so, yes, that element of it, which was go out and make it ourselves without anyone telling us to, was a really important part of that journey. But I would say the most important component of it was that the idea felt like it was just, we felt compelled to make it. And we were really, we just had a really strong belief in the idea. And there were lots of other ideas that we discussed before that, when I was at film school and when Joel and I were at college together, that we hadn't felt that way about. So I would say that one of the key things for me has always been identifying what it is that in an idea that feels like it's telling you to go and make it. Because if you don't feel that yourself, then it would be very difficult to convince other people that they should either buy into it or commission it or broadcast it. So that's and so it's both coming up with the idea, testing it on yourself, and I think also sort of refining your own ability to determine, to work out what a good idea is. Everyone has a different view of what a good idea is, and it, I would say that for me, it's so important to feel a strong sense of belief in what we're making, and if you don't, because most of the time, a TV program or a film will take a very, very long time to develop and then bring people on board. And then if you're lucky enough to get it commissioned, that process takes a long time, and making it takes a very long time. And then it goes out into the world, and you've got to be really, really sure that the idea itself is something that you're really proud of, I think, from the earliest point.
Well, I think that sort of brings us kind of to go from the beginning to kind of now. You are an executive producer of a hit Netflix show. First of all, what is an executive producer?
I'm slightly, I feel insecure that you've asked me that question, because I genuinely woke up yesterday and thought, I'm not sure I can explain what I do to anyone or to myself. But so thanks for putting me on the spot. It can mean lots of things. In film, it does mean something quite particular, which is if you're an executive producer, often you're bringing the money to the project in some form. So you're sort of making the project happen. In TV drama, it can mean a number of different things. But the thing that I tend to do, firstly, I run 11 with Joel. So that's our company. And that involves various sort of things that I do as an executive producer, like oversee a development department where we come up with ideas. And it also involves trying to bring people together in a creative sense who might be good in a team. When it comes to a project, if you take sex education, for example, my role was to, at the beginning, to sort of encourage the idea when it was first developed at 11, and then to try and help find a writer who would be a good writer to bring on board to develop it, and then to oversee the process of going out to the broadcasters to pitch it. And then it's overseeing the idea itself and the script when it comes in, and there's a lot of giving notes, and then trying to convince the broadcaster that it's a good thing for them to buy. And then if the broadcaster does put it into development, and ultimately if they green light it, it's my job to basically guarantee to them that what they're going to get is good, and then to oversee any problems that emerge on the production. So that could be from issues that arise in the scripting process that need to be solved. So it's my job to oversee that happens in a good way, and that there is a solution. Then it will be my job to oversee the sort of hiring of the key heads of department and making sure that they're then hiring good people. And yes, and then in a production, as you can probably guess, there are lots and lots of things that arise, some of which are good and some of which are big problems that then need to be solved. And they could be to do with people's health, or it could be to do with an editorial problem. It could be arguments that people are having on set. It could be that the broadcaster hates what you're doing. It could be that all your rushes are wiped one day and you've got to pay for an extra day's filming that you didn't want to. Or it could be there's a piece of bad publicity that's come out about the production. And then ultimately when you finish, you're overseeing the filming, and then when you come out into the editing process, you're also giving notes and overseeing with the editing team that process. And then it's your responsibility to make sure that ultimately you're handing over a tape or the digital files that represent the show. So in some ways it's it is the role that is there at the beginning and that is there right at the end when everyone else has sort of left the building. And I think you either look at that and think that sounds terrible, or you think, well, that could be quite appealing. And the way that I came to that job was with that first commission that we got at Channel 4 that I mentioned. I came into the industry really wanting to direct and write and sometimes to be in front of camera. And I didn't really think that I would end up being a producer, but in the process of writing and directing and being on screen sometimes, I realized for myself that what I wanted to do was to be part of at the heart of the creative process, right at the beginning, and to have ownership of that bit of the process, and to be as instrumental as possible as the process went on.
I think that's really, because a lot of young people, students at Young Film Academy, actually when you ask them what they want to do, I don't think we ever have producer. It never comes up. And I think that's in part because I'm not sure that young people necessarily understand what it is that a producer's doing. And I think that it is such a varied role, isn't it? I mean, I know from people in the industry have told me you are really detailed at script stage. You love giving script notes and feeding back at that stage and sort of seeing the importance of story and then all the way through production. So I do think it's inspiring to hear about a producer and what you do, because you were describing from the very first to the very end, you are there across the whole period.
It's worth thinking about that, because I think when I think of when I was in my teens, I mainly wanted to write. And I think in my early 20s, I really wanted to direct and write. And then I quite liked the sort of vain idea of being in front of the camera as well. And it's just the sort of development of a massive ego, as you can tell. But it was just by trying stuff out and pushing in different directions that I worked out what I wanted to do. And if I was to be honest about it, I'd say the reason that I decided to produce more than anything else was because I realized that in the end you have to try and decide the direction that you're going to go in. And there are people that are able to direct, write and produce at the same time, but it's very difficult to do more than one project at the same time if you do that. And I just realized that one of the big realizations for me is that there are only a certain number of projects that you can do before you literally die, and that you've got to be quite, you've got to work out what you want to do. And so when you start working out what you want to do, then it gives, it challenges you about which element of the production process is what you find most fun. And I think it should be fun. So I eventually worked out for me that was being in the middle of the producing aspect of it.
Amazing. And when Sex Education as a project was first being developed at 11, did you have a sense then, or any sense, did you sort of realize this was your sort of favorite child of all your children at 11? Or did you know at that stage, did you look at it or read the whatever treatment document it was and think this is a smash hit straight away? Did you have a sense then of how big it was to become?
No, and I don't think it wasn't until quite a lot later that we realized that it would be very big. And by that, I mean, it wasn't really until the show came out. You can't really guess those things. You might have a lot of confidence that the show is going to do well, but the first moment that I felt that the kind of ingredients were going to be really exciting was when Laurie had delivered the sort of final draft of episode 1 of series 1. And then I had been hoping to work with a brilliant director called Ben Taylor, there was a show called Catastrophe. There is a show called Catastrophe, which I really loved. And Ben had he directed all of the episodes of series 1 and series 2. And I just thought that was an incredible feat. And I had met him and I tried to see if he would direct a show of ours called Gap Year, which we filmed in the Far East and in China. And he wasn't able to do it. And then when Laurie's script was delivered, I thought maybe that was something that would appeal to Ben, and Ben looked at it and had a really strong positive reaction to it. And it was at that moment that I thought, wow, this could really be a good combination, Laurie writing and Ben directing. But at an early point, when I was in the pitching process, was a very long one, and between us coming up with the idea and actually getting it greenlit was about, I think, between 3.5 and 4 years. So that was a long old. But early on, I had a sense that it was really worth fighting for, and I suppose an indication of that was that so Amber, my wife, gave birth to our second child in 2014 in September, and 12 hours after she gave birth, I went into a meeting for Sex Education at Channel 4 to try and persuade them to commission the script, which is nuts when you think it was definitely the wrong thing to do, but was a sort of sign of how passionately I felt about it at that point. I'm not sure Amber agreed with it.
Yeah, I was going to say Amber's delighted, I'm sure. Yeah. And how did it originally? Did it start with Channel 4, and then how did Netflix get involved?
It did. We did initially pitch it to Channel 4, and they bought the script, and so we developed it there, and that went on for about a year. But then, quite often at TV channels, because dramas take so long to develop, it's not uncommon for the commissioner to leave the broadcaster and go to a different broadcaster in the middle of that process, which is obviously incredibly disheartening, because it means that your champion of the project, the broadcaster, is sort of no longer there. Anyway, so she left, and then it sort of fell between the cracks at Channel 4, so it came back to us as a project. And so there was a task of trying to find another broadcaster that would like it. And that process went on for about 2 years. So I probably pitched it to 20 to 25 broadcasters around the world. MTV in America really liked it, but weren't able to put enough money up for it. And ABC Australia really liked it, but thought that the tone might be a bit provocative for them. And then there was a new commissioner called Alex Sapot who arrived at Netflix, who read it, loved it. And we were just lucky that she was in a role where she could commission out of the UK for Netflix worldwide, at the point where sex education was the thing that she wanted to commission first. So that's what happened.
Well, and did it feel, and so we're going to open out to questions in just a couple of minutes. I know we've got a lot of people asking questions. Did it feel, to some extent, it's a risky prospect before it was made? In hindsight, you look back on these things and all the risks seem less risky, right? But at the time, for you as an exec and for the company working on it, did it feel like the content was risky, or was that part of its draw?
No, it didn't feel like it was risky, because we had a lot of conversation about where we would pitch the scenes of a sexual content, because we had a lot of discussion, for example, about Skins, which was a good sort of reference point, because we love Skins in many ways, but in many ways there was lots about Skins that we didn't want sex education to be like. And Skins was its own show, and we felt that sex education was sort of quite different, but it was a good reference point for the way they handled sex scenes, which on the whole was quite PG, I suppose. And whereas at the other end of the scale was something like Girls, which was more, 18 certificate, and it's sort of for an older audience, I guess, and was more explicit in the sex scenes. So we had long discussions over months about striking the right tone, where we were going to be using actors who were on the whole going to be over the age of 18, but portraying characters that were under the age of 18. And just getting the tone of that right was very important to us. So you can probably, if you look at season 1, for example, actually the scene between Adam and Amy at the beginning of the first episode is by some distance the most explicit bit of content in the first season, and is a bit unrepresentative of the way that on the whole we do the sex scenes. But it does illustrate what we tend to try and do with those sex scenes, which is that we want we never want the sex to be gratuitous. It always has to be telling story. So yeah, it's just an important part of the dialogue of the show, basically.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so guys, do send your questions in, and we'll be passing those through, and then give you hopefully an opportunity to answer as many of them as we can get through. Before we do that, there's been a lot of questions already sent through to us about the aesthetic of the show, Sex Education. This kind of mix between a kind of slightly Spielbergian 1980s world and the 70s and sort of modern day, and the ability not quite to work out, is it American high school, or is it the UK, or where does it sit? And that seems to be kind of a core element of its success. It's what people have sort of loved without maybe even fully understanding why. Can you just talk us through what was the choice behind that? Because of course you guys could have done that in so many different ways and played basically the same content with a different aesthetic. who were the driving forces in that? What was the thinking?
Well, it goes back to your question about which point in the process made me feel very confident that it was going to be successful or exciting as a show. And that point when Ben Taylor came on as a director is the sort of way to answer this question, because what he saw in Laurie's script was that it had a very strong connection with some of those American high school movies from the 80s, particularly the John Hughes movies, and then high school movies from the States like Freaks and Geeks and Dawson's Creek. And so his idea was that you could basically play the show in that tradition, and sort of root it in that tradition more than in the British tradition of high school movies and TV shows. And that felt really, really strong as a direction to me, because I had always felt that Laurie had written something that was very aspirational. And I think there is a thing in British comedy often, and a British drama, where it's part of our national psyche, I think, to want to watch people suffer a bit and to face challenges, but not necessarily to succeed in overcoming them. And that's almost like a comedy staple in the UK. It's what Fawlty Towers is based on. It's what The Office is based on. And in the same way, if you look at British school shows like Grange Hill, or even Skins to some extent, Ackley Bridge, definitely, there is a sort of, it's not necessarily a world that you think, and the in-betweeners, I'd say, this is true of. They're not necessarily worlds where you look at them and go, I really want to go back to school. They're worlds where you think, oh, I'm so glad that I'm not there. But it's very amusing to watch people suffer in them. Whereas I think in the kind of American approach to those worlds, there is something that draws you back, that makes you feel that those characters are almost having the best years of their lives at school. So Ben realized that, and that's why we decided to kind of create a world which made you feel like you wanted to be there rather than that you didn't want to be there. And it was much more about that than creating a sort of Americanized environment. But we also set it in a kind of place, in locations in Wales, which we found, which were very beautiful. And we were very lucky to discover that, in Wales for 2 or 3 months of the year, it is incredibly sunny and beautiful. So that all plays to create an aesthetic which looks like it's, just a nice place to be, I suppose.
It does. Well, it's a really hard trick to pull off, and I think you did a great job of that. Okay, so we've got some questions coming in. Let's start them. This is an anonymous question, so I'll put it to you. If you guys do want to ask Jamie yourself, just put audio at the end in the Q&A, and that will then be fed through, and we'll try and unmute your audio so you can ask Jamie yourself. But this first question, Jamie, comes, and again, people love, just as you said, hearing about the mishaps. So our first question is, what were the major issues? Or maybe you could give us one. You talked earlier about kind of as an exec, you have to deal with all the stuff that goes wrong, and you gave a few examples. What would you pick out as like the biggest production challenge that you guys faced, or thing that went wrong on Sex Education?
Well, this isn't necessarily the thing that went wrong, but I would say one of the biggest challenges, certainly in the first season, related to the intimate scenes that we were going to shoot. And there was a lot of talk in the industry when Sex Education was commissioned, or there was an increasing amount of discussion around how appropriate it was to ask actors, particularly female actors, to go into intimate scenes where they wouldn't necessarily get any strong sort of choreography, or there wouldn't be that much discussion before the sex scenes were filmed. It was just like, take your clothes off and let's get on with it. And as a sort of general sort of description of the way sex scenes have been filmed in the TV and film industry for the last 50 years, I would say take your clothes off and get on with it is not a bad sort of generalized description. And, it doesn't take a genius to work out that that is not a great way to approach filming a scene where you're putting actors in a situation which is vulnerable, where you know, ultimately you should feel like you're being protected and you are safe and there is guidance and you know exactly what you're doing. But I would say you know, for many decades that hasn't been the case, which is very weird when you think about it. Because if you have a fight scene, you know, it's just an absolute given of the industry that you have a fight choreographer who comes in and just shows you how to, if you're fighting with a sword, you'll get a lot of instruction about how that's going to pan out, and you'll be asking, each of the actors will be asking themselves, are you comfortable with this? Is this move going to work? And you'll go into a lot of detail there. And it's only very recently that we have, well, certainly for our show, we realized that it was a big challenge having young actors with a lot of sexual content. And so one of the big challenges that I sort of was immersed in the first season was talking to the actors and also the actors' agents about what they felt comfortable doing, what we wanted them to do, and trying to find a middle ground that was comfortable for them and also delivered what we wanted editorially. And that varied from actor to actor. And it was really important to us to make sure that people coming on set felt like they were entering a safe environment where they were going to be able to do their best work, but also do it in a way that didn't exploit them or put them in a compromising situation.
Well, I think that's very interesting because actually we had a question here. This is from Eve Hobsbawm, who asked, do you think casting actors in their mid-20s to play 16 or 17-year-olds takes away an aspect of realism about what life is like at that age? For example, Skins used teenagers to play the kids and it was praised for its authenticity. Nevertheless, casting older actors for teenage roles is very common for all shows. Do you think this is necessarily because they only have the acting ability at that age to play the roles well?
That's a great question. I think that there are two things. One is that there is almost a kind of a cliche of this genre, which is that you put, ultimately, if you're going to film a TV show of 6 or 7 years, it doesn't matter how young you're starting that teenager. They're ultimately going to be too old to play the teenager, unless you start them when they're 10, obviously. But you've got to find an age which is going to sustain over multiple years, hopefully. There is a sort of cliche of this genre that if you look at sort of Beverly Hills 90210, where Luke Perry, I think, was sort of in his mid-40s by the time that show finished, or, you know, Dawson in Dawson's Creek was, again, you know, very old when they finished that show. I think Tim Riggins in Friday Night Lights was also way too old by the time that show finished. So it's almost, I quite like that. And I don't, you know, all of the actors playing our key roles are definitely significantly older than they are in the show. And I don't mind that. I think that's in a way quite fun. But to the question, I think that, you know, if you can find young actors who will play the age, and it's appropriate to cast them, and because I think with some of the more sexual scenes, it wouldn't be possible to film with actors under the age of 18 in any case. So that's a consideration for us.
Yeah, I was going to say,
for example, called The Enfield Haunting, where we, you know, the lead actor, Eleanor Worthington Cox, who's the lead also in Britannia, the show that's out on Sky. You know, she was really young when she was on our show, and she was absolutely, it's an extraordinary performance. Yeah. Look it up if you can. It's on Sky. So if you have Sky on Now TV, you can see it.
Fantastic. Okay, so we have our first question we've got a question from Octavia Sanger. So Octavia, in just a moment, I think we should be able to hear you, Octavia. So if you would like to ask your question now. No, we can't quite hear you yet. Oh, yes. We can hear you very shortly. We can hear you now, Octavia. Do go ahead.
So I want to be a film director when I'm older, but what can I do now to help me become successful in film?
That's a great question, Octavia, and very nice to meet you. I would say that if you want to be a director, the sort of key thing, now there are a couple of key things. One is watching as many movies as you possibly can. And I would really encourage you to just watch and watch and watch and watch, and watch really old films. Watch the first films that were made, and then watch as many black and white films as you can bear to. Watch films in different languages, and watch as many contemporary films as you can as well. And I think if by doing that, you'll get a sort of strong sense of the kind of films that you want to make. And I would really encourage you to, like I was saying at the beginning, to develop ideas that that you get really excited about. And then, how old are you, Octavia? If you don't mind me asking.
I'm 16.
Okay, so if you can, I would also sort of recommend, maybe Young Film Academy is a great way to do this. But if you are really keen to be a director, you'll probably need a producer.
Yeah.
And you may feel as a director that you want to write your own material, but maybe you don't. So if you don't, then you also need to find a writer.
I've started writing some of my own things already.
Okay,
So I finished writing my first feature film this year, and I've written a couple episodes of my own TV shows.
Brilliant. Okay, well then you're in a great place to try and find someone that's going to help you shoot them. And that's a great test, because you have to ask yourself, okay, I've written these scripts. Do I feel confident enough about them that I can now find, a camera person who's going to come and join me, and then maybe a couple of actors, try and find actors maybe of your age that would be prepared to come together and form a little unit, and maybe start filming a few scenes. And I think there's an amazing thing that happens when you go out and start trying to film your own material, because you realize that the things that you thought were important, they may be important, but there are other things that emerge that you probably haven't thought of. And then you'll begin to develop your own style, and the things that are important to you in the way that you construct a film will begin to develop. So I just really encourage you to get out there with like-minded people that can help you, get a team together, and then go out and try and film some scenes.
Yeah, I'd say as well, Octavia, I think that's the key, as we say at Young Film Academy, just get out there and do it, try and shoot this material, even if it's on an iPhone or anything you can get. And I think you'll learn very quickly sort of what the material, what's good about it and what isn't, and you learn quickly. Thank you so much, Octavia, for your question. Thank you very much indeed. And Jamie, we had someone who sort of wanted to kind of, I suppose, lead on from that, which is, as a producer of any kind, what is it that you're looking for in a script? What is it when you read a script? If Octavia was reading her own work or was reading someone else's, what is it that makes you go, this speaks to me? Now, I know that's a very general question, but are there any things you can pick out that you look for in quite broad terms?
Yeah, I can. And it's not the same for all producers, so I don't want to speak on behalf of all of them. But the thing that I'm looking for is the idea and strong execution of the idea, and that's pretty much it. If you've got quite a boring idea that you execute brilliantly, I'm probably not very interested in it. And if you've got a brilliant idea that's executed quite badly, then I'm probably not interested in it. So it's just the thing is that the number of scripts that are really, really good, in other words, the idea is good and also they're very well executed, is very, very small. So I'm always looking for that needle in the haystack of both a really strong idea, but then passionately and brilliantly executed. And again, it goes back to that thing. If you're a writer, the thing that you should be testing yourself with is, do I really believe in this idea? Because it's only if you do really believe in the idea that you're gonna execute it to the best of your ability. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, we have a question from Brandon Toledo, who asks, was it difficult to choose the right music for Sex Education? Were you involved in that? Like, how much you have fingers in every pie?
Was it difficult to choose the music? Yes, I'm involved in that discussion, but we also have a brilliant music supervisor called Matt Biffer, whose job it is to propose tracks for each stage of the show. And he's just he's brilliant in that respect. And he did another Netflix show called End of the Effing World. And he's just got great taste. So he will propose a sort of list of titles for each point at which we want music. But then our editors also have been extraordinary on this show, coming up with ideas for tracks. And so there's always quite a good conversation about what tracks belong where. And then I would say that there are probably 3 or 4 occasions on which there have been quite strong, lively debates, I would say, about which tracks work and which tracks are of our show. But one thing that we were really lucky about in the first season was that they developed a very strong sense of the type of music that made sex education. And so now we have a bit of a gift from series 1 and series 2, which is that we know we have a strong sense of the sort of tracks that we want. And that's not always, you can't say that about every show. So some shows are very sort of driven by contemporary tracks, some have vintage tracks, some are driven by the score. So we also have an amazing composer called Ollie Julian who scores where there isn't sort of recorded tracks. He scores a lot of the scenes, and that I think is really distinctive for our show. So that's sort of the process.
And if there's ever, let's say there's disagreement about which track at which point, do you get the equivalent of final say?
It's an interesting question, because ultimately Netflix have, if you did come down to a sort of physical fight about any aspect of production, ultimately Netflix would have to arbitrate. And before it gets to Netflix, then from a technical point of view, then yes, that's true of my role. But that if it gets to a point where I'm having to say it's going to be this way, then something's gone very, very wrong. Because the way that we tend to operate is as a team where it's not necessarily a pure democracy, but there's a lot of kind of discussion as a group about the way, particularly if there's any doubt, we're quite good as a group at coming to a good answer. So for example, we're casting for season 3 at the moment, and it's a really fun process because we're watching people's casting tapes and trying to make a good judgment about who the best person would be in any particular role. And on the whole, let's say in that process, that's Ben Taylor's domain. So on the whole, he's driving those decisions, but there is still a really strong group dynamic on this show, and that's not true on every show.
Well, I have to pick you on that because we have a lot of our young people are screen actors or want to be screen actors, and they've done maybe theatre at school or something, and they come to Young Film Academy and they study screen acting on one of our programs or summer camp, and they produce some amazing performances. And they will be very excited to hear that, that there's a casting process that's going on, and they'll want to self-tape, and especially now at home, which is you and I know every actor does self-taping in their living room with their phone pretty much. Are there any tips that you would give, having watched a lot of self-tapes, I imagine, are there any tips that you would give any aspiring screen actors who are with us today about self-taping?
About how to approach self-taping?
Yeah, well, what would you say, if you had to say, what are the things that you think make an effective self-tape?
That's quite a difficult question to answer, because it's tempting to say, well, making an impression is obviously, a good thing on a casting tape. So making choices which are bold is in some ways something you could advise that. But then there's also, part of what I think you're looking for in any particular actor is it's both what you're bringing of yourself that is just there. You don't want to try and change that. That's part of what makes you unique and individualistic as an actor. And then there's the other thing, which is what's your range and are you going to take direction? And so I'd say showing a lot of yourself and what makes you unique as an actor and as a person is really important. And then demonstrating a bit of range is not bad. So if you're going to do multiple takes, then just showing that you can deliver something a little bit different is quite a good idea.
That's right. So you sometimes get a self-tape with different takes of the same thing actually delivered to you.
Do on occasion, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And then often you might have a sort of, you might have a bit of a covering note saying, I've done this in a few different ways. You probably wouldn't do it massively different from take to take, but you might give just a bit of nuance and variation.
Okay, and so this next question sort of leads us into, obviously it's a really difficult time, lots of people are at home, and one of the few industries that's doing well at the moment is the Netflixes of the world. Their subscriptions are up, people definitely want demand for content, so it's great for the likes of 11 Film. This is a growth industry in the UK. It's a large part of the economy. This question is, with all of that in mind, do you believe subjects boosting film-related careers should be included in school curriculums from a younger age so as to encourage more children in that direction? What's your personal view on that?
Well, my personal view is that arts in general should be a very strong part of the curriculum, and if that's theatre studies or English lit, music, all those things I think are really critical to develop your sense of just creativity and putting your ideas out there. So yeah, I think that's definitely to be encouraged.
And if you could make an adaptation of any classic film, or book, what is it that what would you choose and why? Have you got a pet project, an adaptation that you've thought about?
Yeah, well, a lot of the shows that we have on our development slate are based either on books or books that already exist, or on real events. So we love developing ideas that are based on true stories. So yeah, there's a story that I really love about the sinking of a boat called the Lusitania in 1915, that I think is an incredible story that I'm really keen to make if I can find the right writer.
Mr. Hobsbawm asks, what makes a good TV show premise? Which is a hard thing, because if we all knew, I suppose if you had the answer to that we'd all be in the money. But I think it's a good question. Is there sort of, at the moment in the sort of the climate today, are there certain types of shows? Because the second part of this question is sort of what's popular amongst production companies like Netflix. So I suppose rolled into that is, do you see kind of vogues, fashions, if you like, for the kinds of things that Netflix will look for? And what is the current thing of the moment?
Yeah, it's actually a good question, because a lot has changed in the last 5 years, where I would say 5 or 6 years ago, most broadcasters would have a very narrow sort of range of stuff that they wanted to make, and they would be targeted particularly at the audience that watched that particular network. So, which is just obvious. So if they're a network that is, let's say, BBC One, which is mostly aimed at people above the age of 60, they are only making stuff for people above the age of 60. So you don't try and pitch to BBC One stuff that is for people of the age of 20. Is probably something from 5 or 6 years ago. Whereas I would say today, many more broadcasters are looking for what they describe as a big swing. So an idea which is different and is distinct from lots of other ideas, and is distinct from what other broadcasters are doing. And so that, obviously Netflix do that a lot. They love ideas which test people's appetite for stuff that's new. But I would say that in general, the broadcasters have a bigger appetite, even though they still have to make stuff for their particular demographic. They have a bigger appetite for making content that's surprising. So you'll see that BBC One has a greater range of shows for different appetites than it did even 5 or 6 years ago.
Great. Okay, just a reminder, guys, if you'd like to ask your question to Jamie yourself, just put audio at the end of your question and we will try and spotlight your audio so you can ask it to Jamie directly. Meanwhile, we've got a question in here. This is from Francesca Hall, who asks, in the TV industry, how easy is it to switch between jobs? For example, acting, directing, and editing. So I suppose for young people who often start by having to kind of learn all those trades, is it possible as you develop in the career to continue doing all of those things?
I'd say it's definitely possible. It's definitely also difficult. And I would say, certainly my experience is that and just observing people that apply to us for jobs, and people that tend to do well in the industry tend to be people that focus, and as early as possible sort of have a strong sense of what they want to do and what the role is that they like. So I would say it's definitely possible to switch out from being a director to an editor to a writer to an actor to a producer, but you can definitely do that. But it's not straightforward. So you want to try and test as much as you can at an early point in your career, and then just by testing different things, then getting a lot more focus, I think is a good way to go.
And on one of the roles, obviously a director, and you've talked how crucial the director's role has been on Sex Education for kind of setting the tone and all those things. What are some of the qualities, we've had a question, what are some of the qualities that you look for in a director when you're hiring for a series like Sex Education?
It's a great question, because it's often what the director has done before, but let's imagine you haven't done anything before. So that in a way, how do you start, making stuff? And it goes back to that question which was asked earlier, which is just about how do you become a film director or a TV director? And there's no obvious way to answer that other than start to make stuff, and then maybe start with a couple of scenes, maybe start with a short film, a 10-minute short film that you can make on a very low budget, and then just keep doing that until you feel confident enough to send it maybe to a production company or an agent. And then off the back of doing that a couple of times, then you can begin to get on people's radars. And if you're making stuff, even short films that are good, there are so few people that are making stuff of a very high quality, even if it's on a low budget, that you will definitely get noticed. So yeah, I would encourage you that if you're passionate to be a director and you keep making stuff, you yourself will be encouraged that you're making stuff that's of a certain quality, and then the more you make off your own back, the better.
Well, I think that sort of go get 'em kind of attitude is definitely applicable to the next question. This is from Leah Downs, who says, how can we send a self-tape? Would you consider doing open call auditions for Sex Education? I think this is someone who wants to feature heavily in the next series. So would you consider doing open call auditions?
Well, we do sometimes do the auditions that aren't necessarily a sort of open call, but that we look very widely and in unusual places, and not necessarily at actors or actors with agents. So there are at least a couple of roles that we're looking at for season 3 where they aren't actors that we're auditioning. It's just people. So yes, I mean if you want to be an actor, you have sort of 2 ways to go. One is to perform in whatever it is, a play or in a short film that maybe one of your friends is making, and then try and get a casting director to look at that, or maybe an agent. And then off the back of that, you can start going through the sort of official channels to be put up for roles on a show like Sex Education. And you can push your agent to do that. Or if you don't have an agent and you just want to really wing it and be a maverick, then you could just send an email to the casting director of any show and say, and so I don't want to sort of encourage this too much, but I do sometimes get emails from actors out of the blue who don't have agents. And because it's quite an unexpected thing to do, I quite often look at the tapes if they're sent in, or I will look at the reel. I just think that in general, in life, it is true that if you are quite tenacious, that you can get quite a long way. So if you feel passionate, you don't have an agent, you want to be an actor, and you put something on tape and you send it to someone like me, you might find that you get a reply. And in any case, it's worth trying.
Well, I think that thing, isn't it? There's no set route. It's about trying everything you can. Yeah. Okay, this next question is about sort of planning, I suppose. You know, the logistics behind a show like Sex Education are enormous. I know you guys rent an entire campus, I think, in Wales, a sort of amazing sort of deserted school, which you've more or less taken over for the entire shoot and everything. So this next question, as someone who overthinks everything, they say, to what extent do you plan out scenes and scripts to the T versus leaving things open-ended and see what comes of it? We actually often get a version of this question. I think that there is sometimes a view that filmmaking is kind of a, hey, happy-go-lucky process. You know, you sort of pick up the camera and you go out and you kind of go, let's see how we feel today, versus it being absolutely nailed down to a shooting schedule. I mean, obviously on a feature film, you'll often have literally, you know, a shot list, and it's in every 15 minutes you're getting this particular shot and this close-up, etc. What's your version of that? How perfectly scheduled and to a T does everything have to be?
Well, it depends, because the directors, for example, go in different directions here. They will have prepped in a very detailed way, so they'll know exactly what they want to shoot. Some directors come on set with a literal shot list, and they're going to go through it, get shot by shot, and others don't do that, and they come on and will be more fluid in the way that they create the scene. But in terms of the scripts, there's no real leeway for error, and they go through a very, very rigorous, painstaking process of many drafts, dozens of drafts, and then even once we started shooting, they will continue to be refined right down to the day that they're being shot, and even on the day they're being shot, they can be changed. All of that, so you'll be planning very, very meticulously, and nothing is left to chance in that respect. But even then, you want the ability for the actors and for the director to, and actually the crew, to find something that is spontaneous on the day. And there are a lot of moments in our shows which come out of that, out of something that you hadn't expected, and where an actor has improvised something. So yeah, it's a combination of very, very rigorous preparation, and then the just being willing to let things evolve on the day, which is part of what's fun about shooting.
Yeah, so it's a balance of those two, isn't it? Just allowing enough creativity that it feels free. Okay, this is Finn Hellabo. Wants to know, when you were filming Sex Education, what was the most embarrassing moment that you or the actors have gone through? I'm sure this is not the first time you've been asked this question.
Well, me personally, I would say in some ways the most embarrassing. So at one point, I did bring my two children to set, and they are 7 and 5. And obviously I had to make sure that they were coming to set on a day when we weren't filming anything, sensitive or provocative in any way. But I did notice as I was sort of walking down a corridor that there was someone from the art department running ahead of me, sort of picking up sort of sexual objects that were littered around the set in advance of my children getting there. And I did feel that I was I felt a bit embarrassed by that. But there are, actually embarrassment is not necessarily I think everyone is very comfortable and relaxed on set. And people have more fun than are embarrassed, I think. But I don't know, if you think through in season 2, there's a moment where Otis falls down the stairs, and then Otis and Ola see Jakob and Jean making out on the sofa, and then Jakob falls onto a table which collapses, and he's naked, and that is, I don't think anyone was embarrassed in that scene, but everyone had an incredible amount of fun. And there's just, because you see it in the scene itself, it's very funny seeing sort of half-clothed people falling downstairs and breaking coffee tables naked. So it's that, you can imagine that in the kind of construction of that, we just had everyone loved it, had a lot of fun.
Brilliant. And from any of your projects, this is from an anonymous attendee who says, I think it's a really interesting question. From any of your projects, who is one of the people you believe deserves more credit for what they do or bring to a project? And I think this opens up this question of, a film or a TV show is there so many people who contribute in so many areas. and much of that happens kind of beneath the waterline, you know, and a lot of young people as they start just don't even know about all the different roles that go in. And you look at the credits on a TV show or on a film, and there are kind of unsung heroes. So which particular types of role would you pick out as maybe some of the unsung heroes from your point of view?
Well, if you're talking about sex education, I'd say, for example, our script supervisor, who's called Natalie Schickluna, is absolutely pivotal to the whole shoot process. She is the person that will be going through, every time we shoot a scene, she'll be making notes about what's changed in that particular take, where we've deviated in a particular way, what positions the actors ended up in, whether their costumes or hair or makeup altered in any particular way. So she's got to make sure that the continuity is correct. And then she's an absolutely sort of vital reference point, an ally for the director, so that you know exactly what you were trying to get in the last take and then what has changed. And there's a sort of science to that which she is just brilliant at. And you wouldn't necessarily know that process exists when you're watching a show, but it's absolutely, if you don't have a script supervisor who's just monitoring all of those things, you can get in a lot of confusion and trouble. So she's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, you know, if the script's not right, and often the script supervisor's kind of unknown because they're not the writer, are they? And but it's a really important and vital role, script supervision. Brandon Toledo asked, did you interview many teens to find out about modern day youth relationships for the writing process? So I suppose that's a question about research, either from the production team or the script writing team, and how much of that sort of fed into the project.
Yeah, we did actually. We did at the development stage. And then in the writers' rooms, we often have consultants of different, a consultant in a very loose word, but we'll bring people into the writers' room that might have had a certain experience in their life or come from a particular background. And we bring them into the room not because they're writers, but because we feel like if we can discuss a particular storyline with them or the show as a whole, that they might bring a really interesting dimension to it. Yeah, and those people aren't always in their teens, but we do like on this show to sort of to consult and ask people, because we often don't know the answers. And I suppose one of the things that we're trying to do in the show is to bring points of view and perspectives in that that are important but aren't necessarily frequently represented on screen. So yeah, there's quite a lot of that goes on.
So this question is about the logistics, which, you know, as a producer myself, I think this is so important. And when we get young people making films at Young Film Academy, they quite quickly realize so much of this is kind of about where are you filming and when are you filming and just getting things to the right places. So this is a question about the sort of the locations. So first of all, sort of how long does it take you to film a series from start to end? And maybe could you just talk us through some of your principal locations, because they're kind of an amazing story.
So it's a 4-month shoot, basically, give or take. So we tend to start, well, for the first 2 seasons, we've started in early May and then go through to September. And then, yeah, the locations are really important on the show, and we've got a brilliant location manager called Midge Ferguson, who's found locations for many, many different shows of many years in and around sort of Cardiff and Bristol. And he read the scripts and he really loved them. And Ben Taylor, the director, and I went to meet him shortly after the show had been greenlit. And he initially showed us some locations quite close to, you know, within 10 or 15 miles of Cardiff or Newport or Bristol. And there were some good ones, but then we just suggested that he would go maybe another 5 or 10 miles outside that radius. And then he began to show us some just really stunning locations that we couldn't quite believe had never been filmed, or certainly hadn't been shown much on TV or film. So we came across this place called Simmons Yacht, for example, which is, I guess, 20 or 25 miles north of Newport. And there was this incredible sort of bend in the river and kind of in the middle of a valley with beautiful trees going up each side of the valley, and then opposite the bend on one side was this extraordinary sort of red and white house, looked like it was a wooden house. And so Midge saw this and then just went round one day and dropped a note through the letterbox of the house saying we'd be interested to have a look around it. And then we got a letter from the owner saying, well, yeah, you can come and have a look around it. And that house was, it was actually transferred, I think, from Sweden, sort of slat by slat and wooden piece by wooden piece in 1910 or thereabouts, and was brought over to Wales. And that's the house that is Jean's house in the show. So it's, yeah, that's not a bad example of the way that we approach locations on this show. We try and find stuff that's unusual, and there is a lot of amazing sort of scenery and unseen stuff in that part of the world.
And the school is a completely disused school. Is that right?
It was actually, ironically, it was, I think, the media campus of the University of South Wales. And so actually some of the people that have come up on the show and have worked on the show said that they actually went to university there on that campus, which is surreal. But yeah, we work in that space and we have control over that space for the months that we shoot. So it's an absolutely ideal place to film.
Wow. Okay, Jamie, so we're going to just take a couple more questions before we wrap up. So we've got one here, I suppose, about going back to the sort of the age rating and stuff like that about the show. Sex Education is age rated 18, but there are far younger fans of the show. Would you recommend your show to young teens?
Well, what I've observed is that there are a lot of households where the parents watch the show, and then the kids watch the show, but they tend to watch them separately, and then they sort of compare notes afterwards. And I think that's really great if your parents let you do that, I suppose. And because I think there are a lot of issues on the show that are really relevant to teens, and I think there are a lot of issues on the show which parents really sort of, it turns out, enjoy and benefit from watching and sort of learning about. A lot of people have said to me, and I know it's been written a lot in the press, that they wish that this show had been around when they were a teenager. So I'd hate to feel like teenagers were missing out on it, because in a way it's nice seeing what people go through when they're that age, and having a sort of reference point. And often people find that in music, and I think, you know, high school shows are a great way of reflecting on that time in your life, and hopefully it gives you some encouragement as well. So yeah, I would.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Jamie, thank you very much indeed. I just want to take us back before we wrap up to this sort of what we're really passionate at Young Film Academy about, this idea of passion starting early and how do you break in and finding your own way and all this stuff. Now, I heard a story that you once rented a tank for the purposes of driving it into Downing Street. Now, this was a story I heard, and I'd love you just to tell us this, because I think it maybe serves, if there's any truth in this, as a story of kind of resilience and finding a way and just sort of doing that bold thing that others wouldn't. So maybe you just tell us a little bit about the tank.
Oh yeah, well that was a documentary that I was making for Channel 4, I think in 2005, and it was called Don't Panic. And I think it was Tony Blair that was it Tony Blair? Yes, it was Tony Blair that was in Downing Street at that point. And so we wanted to basically have an interview with him, and they obviously weren't giving one to us. And but I did have a press pass, because I was, I suppose, a journalist, and so we thought, well, wouldn't it be a great idea if we hired a tank, and then our idea was we'd park it literally outside Downing Street, and then I'd get out and walk in with my press pass. It seemed like quite a far-fetched idea, and then we thought, well, if you did, can you actually hire tanks? And then so we looked up, and there was a company amazingly called Tanks a Lot. And so we got in touch, and they did hire us a tank. You couldn't drive it, but it was on a low loader, so you were being pulled around. But it looked, when we were filming it, like we were driving it. And so we drove it, we were in it and also filming, and then we drove it around Parliament Square and then parked it outside Downing Street. And I'm sure you wouldn't be allowed to do this now. We parked it outside Downing Street and then jumped off it. And then I did walk, I did walk into Downing Street with my press pass. And then I wouldn't encourage any of you to do this, because I suspect it's probably quite dangerous now. But then, as a press member, you're supposed to stand behind a fence and wait to ask questions if a minister comes out. And I don't think anyone else had done this before. But if you have a press pass, so there's nothing to stop you just walking up to the door of Downing Street. It'd be very unusual to do it, but we thought that. So anyway, so Joel, who was filming it, went in and stood behind the fence, and then I came in shortly after him, got off the tank, walked in, and then walked up to the door of number 10 and knocked on the door, and they did then open the door, and I went in, and they shut it, and shortly after that they arrested me. So I wouldn't recommend it, but it was good for our show.
Well, I think that on a way to end, what inspiring anecdote. I would advise all our young filmmakers and screen actors who are watching this, that anecdote I think says a lot, which is, if you want to work out how you get through the door, you basically find a way, whether that means hiring a tank or knocking on the door, or some way to do what Jamie has done. So Jamie, thank you so much for giving up your time today to be with us and to share your knowledge. I know on behalf of all the students watching and anyone else across the world that they would really appreciate the time you've given.